Imagine, it's the early 1800s and you've just enlisted in the Duke of Wellington's British Army. Pay is bad, discipline is harsh, and if you don't catch a French musket ball, you might catch any number of diseases. Life was tough for the men Wellington himself referred to as the scum of the earth.
But not all British units were the same. A chosen few could find themselves serving as green-jacketed riflemen. These men, selected on merit, would be elite marksmen, feared by the enemy and respected.
During the Napoleonic Wars, the British Army experienced a time of rapid change. At the beginning of the French Revolutionary Wars in 1793, the army was a small, awkwardly administered force of barely 40,000 men. By the end of the period, the numbers had vastly increased to over 250,000 soldiers by 1813.
Whilst the battlefields of the early 1800s looked similar to those of centuries gone by, with columns of infantry advancing slowly toward enemy musket volleys, the British Army was starting to diversify, adding specialised and elite units to its forces.
In this video, we're joining the Coldstream Guards 1815 and 95th Rifles, reenactment groups representing real units that served in the Peninsular War and helped to defeat Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo.
We'll find out how your regiment in Wellington's army would shape your experience on the battlefield.
I don't want to get friendly with you. What's your last name?
Dessent. It's French.
French? We've got a spy in the ranks.
And determine your chances of survival.
Because of the nature of your skirmish line, you could be quite a long way away from your nearest NCO. So you had to be able to think for yourself.
So the question is, could you survive as a soldier in the Duke of Wellington's army?
A day in Wellington's army started bright and early, so I'd better get a move on. After picking up my uniform, I was told to report to the unit sergeant to find out what exactly I was in for.
Clive, how's
Good
it
morning,
going?
Louis. How are you?
I've arrived in camp.
You
my
have?
first day
Yeah.
in the British infantry. Where are your recruits generally coming from to join the Redcoats?
The recruits would have come from several sources. You'd have had people who saw recruiting parties in the local town, got enthralled by the thought of going away in life and adventure.
Yep.
You've got to remember what life was like 200 years ago. You're up in the fields, dawn till dusk, and then you have a recruiting party coming through the town, and the recruiting sergeants are looking very smart in their uniforms. They would have had ribbons adorning their uniforms to make them look even smarter. They'd have had drummers, they'd have had young soldiers, they'd have had a bag of shillings, and they would have been plying young lads with drink.
Yep.
And they just were talking about life of adventure, going off to Spain, fighting in the Peninsula, wherever. But basically being involved in war, battles, loot. The other thing is, and they don't tell them it's if you survive, but it's the fact that you would have a pension. If you do your full service, the king will give you a pension. Now, there isn't anybody else that gives you a pension back then.
And were there entry requirements? Did they have to be a certain height? Were there kind of medical standards that they had to meet to join the army?
You were looking, it's same as the army today. It's a physically demanding occupation. So you're looking for young, healthy men, preferably with all their own teeth.
Okay.
Because you've got to remember when they're loading the guns, they have a paper cartridge, they have to bite the paper off. If you've got somebody who's lost all his teeth, he's not going to be much good to you because he's not going to be able to open the cartridge to load the weapon to fire it. Again, height-wise, depending on what height you were, might dictate where you went to in a regiment. Certainly for the Coldstream Guards back in 1815 and beyond, and earlier than that, the tallest, strongest guys would have been in the Grenadier Company. Back then, every battalion consisted of a grenadier company, line companies and a light company. So somebody that was smaller, more agile, may well have ended up in the light company. Big tall guys would have ended up in the grenadier company, and the rest would have been in the line companies.
I'm going to say confidently that I've passed my entry requirements at least to get this far to come to the camp.
Well, you're in a uniform.
I've got my
so
own teeth. I've got my uniform. Let's talk about the uniform. So
yes.
I've been issued with this kit. You say
yeah.
it's provided. What am I wearing?
Right. Basically, on your feet, you have got straight-lasted boots. So these are basically, if I turn around to show you mine, they're straight. There is no left or right.
Okay.
Officers could have left and right boots and shoes. Private soldiers didn't need it. You've got grey half gaiters on under your trousers, and the reasoning behind them, you've got to remember that uniforms mirrored the fashion of the day.
Yeah.
As civilian fashion changed, that was taken across into the military uniforms. So you've got half gaiters on. With the half gaiters, if it was wet, muddy conditions like it was at Waterloo, then the soldiers would have tucked their trousers into the half gaiters to stop the bottoms getting clogged up and muddy.
Got it.
And they're held on with cloth braces. So no stretchy braces back then. You've got cloth braces, they've got little ties on them that get done up, and that is how you adjust them. So you always have them a little bit loose because you don't want them snapping and pulling the buttons off. You're wearing a red coat. British Army wears a madder red coat. It goes back to the English Civil War. When Cromwell formed the new model army, they went to the wool merchants in London to see, because Cromwell had the idea of all soldiers being in the same uniform. Because red was the cheapest cloth available in London at the time, the British Army adopted red.
Cheapest cloth? It's
Back then.
cheapest cloth? Was it anything to do with being seen on the battlefield? That's what you hear sometimes, just the cheapest?
Just at the time, when they went to the wool merchants, that was the cheapest cloth. So the British Army adopted it. Yes, as a byproduct of that, it was more easily seen on the battlefield in the smoke of battle as we've got coming off the fire.
Exactly.
The buttons, Coldstream Guards are obviously a royal regiment, hence we've got blue facing cloths. So your epaulets, your collar and your cuffs are all blue because it shows we are a royal regiment.
Okay.
You've got two cross belts. On one side, you've got a leather cartridge box. This opens up, and in there would be all your ammunition. There is a wooden block inside, and all your cartridges would be placed in there. Underneath that, if I was to pull this out, in fact you can just see it down the bottom, there is a metal tin. That tin contains your cleaning kit for the gun and your spare ammunition. On the other side you have got a bayonet. This is a 17.5-inch socket bayonet. If we pull it out, if you hold that, that is the bayonet that fits on the gun. 17.5 inches. If you look, there is a blood flue that runs along the outside, and that fits onto the gun. The only thing that holds it on the gun is this little stud just here. So when it goes on, it just holds on, and that is a bayonet fitting. And if you think back to the old bayonet fitting light bulbs, that's where it comes from. Now, on your head, you've got the Belgic shako. This was introduced late in the Peninsular War. And what you've basically got replicates a Portuguese cap at the time, and it's got a false front on it. So it's actually higher at the front than it is at the back. But the idea behind that was it would make you look taller and more imposing for the opposing army. And obviously it was a cheaper way of getting a big hat because you didn't have to have it at the back as well, it was just the front. On it you have got a shako plate. NCOs, sergeants and above, would have a gold cord. Officers would have a red and gold cord to distinguish obviously the rank. I'm a sergeant, so I've got gold. The Grenadier Company and the Centre Companies would have white worsted cords, and the light companies would have green.
Is that the same with the plumes then? Do they tell the
yes,
difference
the
between
plumes also say what part, so you can look at the soldier, you've got a line of soldiers and you know which part of the regiment they are.
The British Army may have been divided into specialised companies, but when it came to the maintenance of clothing and weaponry, every soldier was in the same boat.
One thing for certain is that even back then, the soldiers there was high standards on uniform and equipment. If you're fighting in a war and your gun is dirty or rusty, the chances are it won't fire. And therefore, as a soldier, no good, because if your gun won't fire, all you've got is a big club.
Yep.
And that's not going to win a battle.
In the 1700s, European armies mainly consisted of large numbers of line infantry troops, dressed in brightly coloured uniforms, firing volleys in massed formations on open fields. These tactics proved ineffective for the British against French troops and their Native American allies in the wilderness of North America in the middle of the 18th century. After some unofficial experiments, using lighter infantry proved to be effective in the conflict, officers Colonel Manningham and Lieutenant Colonel William Stewart proposed to use what they had learned to train a new experimental corps of riflemen. These troops, distinguished by wearing dark green instead of scarlet jackets and armed with a rifle as opposed to musket, would eventually form the 95th Rifles in 1803. To find out more about this specialised corps, I was told to report to my officer in the woodland surrounding our camp.
Ah. That man, top button, done up, now.
Gosh, sorry about that, Corporal Crocker. Anyway, gents, I'm in the green jackets, but I don't have a green jacket on. Why is that?
Well, for starters, you haven't earned it, have you? You're a recruit. A green jacket does need to be earned, and it'll be the biggest privilege of your life when you're awarded one. In the meantime, you are dressed in recruit's outfit. It's fatigues, otherwise known as undress uniform. That will be your kit until you get your greens.
Got it. And talk to me a bit about this uniform. There was obviously talk about the king and the influence from Germany and the Jaegers wanting to look like them, but also camouflage-wise. It would be a myth to say these were created just for camouflage purposes.
Absolutely. In the Georgian army, fashion was king. Everything was subservient to that. But that said, there was a nod to camouflage. Right. Green is the traditional colour of the Jaeger, as you mentioned, and actually this plunging V-line of buttons, you see it in several continental armies, so they're copying the fashion of the Jaeger. But the nod to camouflage was the black collar and cuffs.
Right, yes.
The 5th 60th have a green uniform. They preceded us by a few years. Adopted the style, which was basically copied by the 95th, but they had red collar and cuffs. And in this kind of ground behind us, you wouldn't see the green necessarily first, you'd see the red collar and cuffs, and you do. Yeah. When we do tactical exercises, that is what you see first when you're up against them.
And Richard, talk to me a bit about the equipment that you're wearing. You've got quite a lot on.
I have, yeah. This is a full marching order for a rifleman. We have the 1812 pattern regimental cap with bugle badge and the green plume, which signifies light infantry, powder flask. So this would carry an amount of powder which could be used to prime the pan of the rifle. We have the sword belt. The sword is a sword bayonet. So the rifles today, the modern rifles, still refer to their bayonets as a sword, even though these days they are a bayonet. The sword fits onto the 1801 pattern infantry rifle, latterly known as the Baker rifle. This one here is the ball pouch containing the musket balls. We have cartridge box. So this would contain pre-made cartridges of powder and ball, and we go on to haversack. Haversack would contain my rations for the day, and that would be cuts of meat on the bone, and not very nutritious.
These things would have actually been filthy.
Yeah.
Because, as Richard said, it was uncooked meat, blood, dirt. You know, you can imagine more soldiers were lost through disease than through combat, and things like the
Haversack full of meat. You can see why.
Yes, and water from dubious sources.
Yeah.
And moving on to water from dubious sources, we have the canteen. Now the canteen would probably not contain water because in most places the water wouldn't have been safe to drink anyway. So it would contain probably small beer or spirit of some kind.
Right. Okay.
And because it was safer to drink than
absolutely
than
yes.
the water. We have the knapsack. So that would contain all of the rifleman's worldly goods. Everything in there from a spare shirt, spare soles for the boots, because on campaign in the Peninsula especially, the marching distances were immense.
Yes.
Boots would not last very long at all. Spare soles were there. It would also contain shaving equipment. They had to be clean shaven.
That's interesting. And did that go for the redcoats, or was that just for the
Well,
green
the
jackets?
standard rule for shaving was every 3 days and Sunday.
Right, that makes sense. Fashion is king, as you said. Yeah. and Richard, were there opportunities for riflemen to show their own initiative as opposed to the redcoats who was just generally following orders?
Yeah, absolutely. Just the nature of the rifleman's job, or main job of skirmishing, would mean that you were in your pairs way in advance, making a screen to protect the redcoats behind you. Because of the nature of your skirmish line, you could be quite a long way away from your nearest NCO. So you had to be able to think for yourself.
Luckily, I didn't need to worry about thinking for myself. For the redcoats, it was all about working together as a well-oiled machine. Monotonous drill formed a key part of training, preparing them for the rigours of long marches in good order, not to mention discipline in battle. Unfortunately, I'd already lost track of the time.
Corporal, I've been told to report for drill here.
You're late. Get in the middle, in between Mitchell and Sergey.
Okay.
Go in around the back.
Around the back.
I just issued you your uniform.
Correct, yes.
Looks like it. Right. We're going to do a bit of a foot drill to start with. To face the right, you'll move your right foot back, and so the left heel is cupped in the hollow in the right foot, and then you will pivot on your left heel. The left heel always stays affixed to the ground as if there was a pin connecting you to the ground when turning on the spot. Have you got that, recruit?
Yes, think so.
Excellent. Squad will face to the right. Right, face. Good. Squad will left face. Left, face. Left, face. What's your name, Private?
Louee.
I don't want to get friendly with you. What's your last name?
Dessent.
Besson.
Dessent.
Vescent.
Dessent, it's French.
French?
We've got a spy in the ranks.
Maybe not the best first impression, I will admit, but I was starting to get the gist. With the musket now in hand, I was ready for the next stage of training.
Squad, order, arms. That's right, you're going to wait for it, Vescent. Squad will advance arms. Step 1. The neck. That's it, make sure you've got a firm grip. Step 2. That's it, bring it higher, Vescent. Flat of the hand. Step 3. And 4. Squad, advance, arms. Good, we are improving all the time, even Vescent.
With my reputation in the ranks improving only slightly, it was time for some marching.
When I give the command, eyes right, march, you will march at the ordinary pace. Squad, eyes right, march. Dress it forward on the left. Squad, halt. Squad will withdraw. By the right, aim out, face.
Oh, no.
Hold up your left hand.
I was trying to think which foot went back to about face, and I think I got it wrong, didn't I?
Keep closer to him, Dessent. Squad. Halt. Front.
It seemed my incompetence was having an effect on the troops. It was probably best to let them get on with it.
So, you could have just seen that my performance in the drill wasn't exactly brilliant, but what really struck me is that that wasn't as easy as they make it look. I think the idea is very much that you are concentrating more on following those commands and going through what you know. You're almost more worried about doing that right than you are about facing the enemy. But I definitely need some more work.
As well as their organised line infantry, by the turn of the 19th century, European powers were starting to value a different kind of soldier. Instead of marching in file toward the enemy, light infantry troops would travel in a dispersed formation, often concealed in woodland, instructed to aim at prized targets within the enemy ranks. Whilst the redcoats bore the brunt of the casualties out on the open battlefield, the riflemen took a different approach. They were masters of disguise.
You know I can see you over there.
Damn it. I was joining Richard and the other green jackets to find out how skirmishers were deployed in combat. So Richard, we're currently on patrol, but as opposed to the redcoats who are slowly marching towards the enemy in column formation, we'd been in a different formation, weren't we? We'd been in loose skirmish formation. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the rifles and light infantry would work as pairs. They would split off into a skirmish line, which would cover the frontage of a body of redcoat army. We could then skirmish forward and seeking out the enemy skirmishers.
Yeah.
We're wanting to actually get to a point where we can see the French voltigeurs, which incidentally only had carbines, not rifles. So they would be in our range, but we'd be safe from them. And then we could start engaging the enemy.
It was time to get into position and see how this would all work in practice. And so we'd be deployed, like you said, ahead of the main army, but also perhaps on the flanks as well. Were they ever used in?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the rifles were able to change their direction to flanking very quickly, and that was the other thing, obviously, about about the rifles was their speed of manoeuvre was very quick.
Right, Richard, let's say we've just seen some French voltigeurs in the distance. How would we advance?
Rifles will fire and advance. I've just fired, so you're advancing default 6 paces. We're making sure, crocker loaded, that one of the pair is loaded at all times, thus the delay waiting for your file partner to be reloaded before you loose your shot off.
Got it, okay.
So my file partner will tell me when he's ready.
Okay. Ready?
Loaded.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Crocker loaded.
And I've fired.
Close on the front. So, we've now closed up.
Yep.
We've gone about as far as we need to go because we've pushed those voltigeurs back. They aren't really keen on going up against riflemen because we've got the range and the accuracy that they don't have with their carbines. You know, versus our rifles, it's not really a fair fight.
No.
So we've done our work. We've picked off a few targets at range. We've pushed the enemy back. But what we've also done, and what we want to do, is draw the enemy forward.
Got it.
At which point, we want to then bug out back behind, let the redcoats come forward and do their work, and mop up the French.
Before we mopped up any French soldiers, I was getting hungry. Time for some lunch after a morning of tough training.
Okay, Sue, so what can I expect as a member of this unit for my rations?
Your rations are quite limited, but you would be given meat, bread or biscuits, never both, or you would get flour. If you got flour as part of your ration, you would have to make your own bread. So it was very simple, solid food, but it wasn't frequent. You would be hungry, and you would be... The responsibility of the army was to put you as a fighting man on the field. That's it.
Were they eating generally twice a day, I've heard? Was the usual way?
Yeah, it depended on where you were. On the line of march, if you were marching, you wouldn't stop to cook. You would be eating the biscuit or bread or cheese or egg, whatever was locally available, because your suppliers, your sutlers, would go out and have the rations there ready. The driver a herd of beef cows. They would be stripped and broken down so that you've got meat for the soldiers. There is a line in an account of a regiment that says the women that accompanied the soldiers, those soldiers fared better than the single soldiers in mess.
Those that brought their wives along?
Yeah, if they were allowed to go with the march.
We don't hear so much about
No.
these women, do we? And is there almost a sense that the army don't want to acknowledge that they're there in these camps?
Yes. Yes. Wellington didn't want the baggage train, and it was quickly realised that they did actually perform a very valid function within the movement of a troop on line of march. It's necessary. The extra food, if there was no rations, the women would go out and forage.
So there were also lots of risks for the women in camp, right? If their husband, for example, died,
Yep.
what would happen to them?
There are several things. The first one was the main accounts that we have is that they had a very short period of time in which to either find themselves a new husband. We have accounts of women being married by the afternoon.
Wow.
If they were left alone in camp, not only were they vulnerable because of the army, the enemy, they were vulnerable because of the soldiers. If you think of a campsite with no protection.
And I guess if they were left alone, they might have to resort to prostitution or something
it was it was a well-known thing.
And Sue, given that I'm hungry, I'm looking at this saurine-looking type.
Yes, it is. It's the closest you can get to it, but it is actually a very old recipe. It's called Irish brath, and obviously there were a lot of Irish wives. Generally, they would be assigned to make. It was one of the ways that women could make money on line of march. They could look after the young officers' wives, and there's a lot of stories of the Irish sergeants. Their wives would provide this, so you are more than welcome. It is very heavy, but it is like saurine. It's made of bran, so it's about getting calories in you, keeping you warm, keeping you being able to get on that field and fight.
It's quite dense, isn't it?
It is. It's
dense,
solid.
Filling.
But
I
you
imagine
think
a few bites of this, and you'd start to be ready to go back out on the march again.
But it would go in your knapsack. So that you had something to because you wouldn't be able to stop and create fire and use the beef, and that would be for when you were garrisoned or when you were actually stopped.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Sue. I'm well fortified, ready for the battle.
You're very welcome.
Whilst Louis was preparing for battle, munching on his Irish brath,
I was focused on ensuring my unit was well supplied with ammunition. A meeting with the unit armourer was in order.
Hello, Paul.
Morning.
Morning. We are in the camp. You've got some lead burning over the fire. Now, usually the British Army would have a plentiful supply of ammunition, but each rifleman was taught how to make his own ammunition, right?
That's correct. You've got guys that were out, obviously in their previous lives as hunters and everything else like that, so they would make their own ammunition when in the civilian life. And when they came into the army, any guys who didn't, they would actually be taught how to do it. There's very little evidence at all of actually riflemen making their own musket balls, due to the fact there's a plentiful supply of ammunition.
Yeah.
It would come in packets, shipped over from England, or if the packets of ready-made ammunition sort of depleted, then they would have barrels of powder, and they would also have barrels of lead ball as well. So they would actually then make their ammunition using paper cartridges, putting them together, rather than having them as a whole.
Well, let's say it was a very rare circumstance and we needed to make one desperately. Show me how you do that.
So basically you bring on your brazier, there'd be plenty of braziers in camp, because the guys would mess together, so they would have braziers. Go to the unit armourer who would carry the kit, basically your small ladle and bullet moulds, and obviously a crucible there to actually melt the lead in. As you see here, I've already got this up to temperature now.
Yeah, I can
you see there's the lead there.
Melted.
Okay, so that's there. And it's basically just taking a small amount of lead in there, pour it in, keep it going. Doesn't matter if it overflows.
Okay.
Okay, tap off. Okay, pull all the excess off there. And literally that is it, because as soon as you actually turn around and then
got it, look at that.
And there's your ball there.
And would this ball, would that be used in the Baker rifle as well as the Brown Bess musket, or was this specially for the Baker rifle?
This is just for the infantry rifle.
And is it slightly smaller then?
Yeah, it is slightly smaller.
Got it, okay.
If I show you, there's a Brown Bess. There's a Brown Bess ball there. You see it's a lot bigger than ours there. And our ball there was a lot smaller. We had rifled barrels. We didn't have longer smoothbore barrels like the Brown Bess. So we didn't, we could carry more ammunition as well because it was less.
That's a good only 2/3 of the size.
Yeah. So that's the difference between your Brown Bess and your rifle ball.
And Paul, I've heard the term patched ball as well, and I know that there was a certain member of the 95th Rifles that was able to shoot a greater distance, over 200 yards, using patched ball. What does that mean?
But basically, the riflemen themselves would actually patch their ball. They would do it when they're sat around camp. And the idea is to get a greater purchase on the rifling, not so much to increase the range, but more so to give them a little bit more accuracy.
Got it,
and what would happen is the patch ball would be a petal shape. It would wrap round a musket ball, tied with cotton, soaked in water and left out to bake, which would shrink the leather around the ball itself.
Right, okay.
And this one here is a patch ball. You can see there that the flower petal shape.
Oh, yes.
It's shrunk to the ball there. Okay, it's nipped off, and that is a patch ball there.
That's it. So you can see. And was the idea that when it came out of the barrel, it'd be spinning in, therefore more
It would do,
accurate?
because we would have rifle barrels. That's
right.
what,
yeah.
So then it would do. But it wouldn't give them extra range. It would just give them that accuracy, so that they could actually get on target. Now the guy you were talking about is a rifleman Plunkett, and it was in a little village called Cacabelas in Spain. Now he went forward. He was with the 1st, I do believe, 95th. Seeing a French general on the crossroads, he went forward and he was on a downward slope. So he literally sat on the slope, leant back and put his sling around his foot and took aim at the general himself and hit him. He fired that and hit him. And when his aide-de-camp went out to actually turn around and give him aid, just to prove it wasn't a fluke, he shot him as well.
Again. Well, that's a legendary shot by Thomas Plunkett. I'm going to have a go with the Baker rifle, but I don't think I'll do as well. But yeah, let's see how I get on.
If there was even the slightest grain of truth in this story, it was easy to see why the elite marksmen that made up the 95th Rifles were so feared by the enemy. I was interested in the weapon that made the 95th so deadly. After all, what was a rifleman without his rifle?
Tim, I've just come from camp where I've seen some of the musket balls, or the balls specifically made for this rifle here, the Baker rifle. Tell me a bit about the history of the Baker rifle.
Well, first of all, it isn't the Baker rifle in our period.
Okay.
That came later. It was known as the 1801 short infantry rifle. So, having decided that they wanted a British rifle-armed light infantryman, the hunt was now on for the weapon. And so they put out word around the London and Midland gunsmiths that there would be a competition at Woolwich, at the arsenal there, and that they were all to bring their specimens on such and such a date. Most of them were quite different. A lot of them were just copies of the German rifle, which was already knocking around the army at the time. But others were actually a rifled version of the Brown Bess musket, which was phenomenally heavy.
Yes.
And for a rifleman to aim steadily, you know, it was just too much. And we think that there was a fair amount of insider briefing to Ezekiel Baker, a London gunsmith, who came up with probably exactly what the founding fathers of the rifles were after. And actually, over the time, from 1801 onwards, it actually got lighter. So it was still a bit on the heavy side in the first iteration.
And Richard, talk to me about the individual components of this rifle and what made it different from your standard Brown Bess musket.
So obviously the main difference would be the fact that it's it's rifled. So you have grooves and a slight twist. That provides a spin on the ball, which gives you more accuracy and greater distance. It's also a much shorter barrel, as you can see. The Brown Bess is probably standing yay high, I would imagine,
and a lot lighter as well.
It's a lot lighter. The balance on the weapon is really, really nice. I mean, it lends itself to a rifleman's aim and accuracy in the fact that it's just so nicely balanced. You also have here a patch box. So this would contain the patches, leather or linen usually.
And talk to me about this mechanism.
So we move up to this is the lock. So the expression lock, stock and barrel. But this is the lock. Here you have the hammer which holds the flint. You have the pan and what we call the frizzen. The pan holds your priming powder, and then you'll see here the touch hole.
Yeah.
The touch hole allowing this powder ignited to send its flame through that touch hole into the barrel.
And out the barrel.
To project the projectile.
And I noticed this here, this is a key difference between this rifle and the musket, your iron sight here and the sight at the end of the barrel.
Absolutely, yes, and the difference between that and the Bess, because the Brown Bess musket doesn't have a sight, it doesn't need a sight because you're not aiming. We're aiming here, so the foresight will be lined up with the fixed sight here for a slightly shorter range. For a longer range, you flip this one up, also lined up with the foresight, and that will give you your accuracy for a shot at a greater range.
And what kind of range are we talking here? If with the musket, we're talking maybe 70 yards, 60, 70 yards. With this rifle, 300 or so?
Riflemen were trained to shoot accurately to 300 yards. Wow. In a battle situation, I would say your average shot was probably 150, 200 yards. Yeah. Which, you know, in those days was a phenomenal distance to get an accurate shot from a weapon when, you know, all that had preceded it was flintlock muskets. Yeah. So this was a game changer when it came to accurate shots at distance.
I really want to get my hands on this rifle. Is that possible for me to have a go and shoot this?
I think we can let you do that, Luke. So if we just want to walk this way, Rifleman Wilkinson will put you through your paces.
Let's do it.
Okay, Luke, so to load the rifle, we have a dummy cartridge here, paper cartridge.
Yeah.
So take it to half cock.
Yeah.
Bite the top of the paper.
Just the top so it doesn't end up in your mouth.
pour a small amount into the pan so it's more or less level. Just knock it back so it's into the touch hole, that's fine.
Yeah.
Close the frizzen. Turn the gun around, the rifle around, and pour the powder down the barrel. That's it.
Yeah.
Remove the ramrod. Push down the barrel.
Yeah.
And shove the paper all the way to the bottom. Back home.
There we go.
Rifle round. We're now ready to fire.
Okay.
So next action is to make ready. So you pull the cock fully back. Take aim.
Leaning into it.
And fire.
Woo! Not
Good.
too much of a kick.
Get a bigger kick when there's a ball in there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we've taken out the enemy drummer or general or NCO.
Yeah, there's a couple of them more that need shooting, I think, now.
The Brown Bess might be less accurate, but it could be reloaded more quickly by well-trained soldiers. Luckily, I already had some humbling experience loading a musket.
That's it, nice. Yeah, I think you've learned the first lesson there.
Not too far down, so that there's not loads of gunpowder in your mouth.
Make ready. Full cocking as you do so. Present. Fire! Recover.
That's quite a kick even for a blank round, isn't
Even
it?
just the powder, yeah.
It certainly scared the birds. Is it true that they weren't really aiming the Brown Bess musket, they were just putting lead balls towards the enemy?
Well, the British soldiers were always taught to aim low, so they'd be aiming about the midriff. So that meant if there's a kick up, you still get a chest shot. And it would usually help if you're in massed ranks. It's not difficult to miss.
Yeah.
At that level. And also, of course, they'd wait till the French were a lot closer. The French and the Continental armies tended to fire at a greater range, of course. So the British had the greater luxury, through their discipline, of waiting until the French got in that sort of 100 yards or less killing field when it's at its effective range. So, yeah, they'd be aiming at the belly anyway.
I see. And the French were tending to come at them in big columns, weren't they, as opposed to lines, which they must have made a pretty easy target. I guess maybe they didn't have to aim as much.
Indeed. And what the French were relying on, as I said, about how your continental armies, because they're less disciplined, less well trained, they'd aim for a chest shot. But of course it meant that if at 200 yards they fire off and the musket kicks, it goes over the heads of the French. And 200 yards, you've lost your accuracy. It's no longer the effective range, because that's about 100 yards. And the ground that column can cover in 200 yards whilst you're still trying to reload is what the French relied upon, because it won the way in the Revolutionary Wars when they didn't have any training anyway. So they relied upon that élan, as they called it, to smash through the thin the lines of the enemy. But then they came unstuck against the British, because we'd wait till that effective range and less. We'd aim low, and because of the way our platoon and company fire, constantly pouring shots into them.
I don't know how much elan I'd be showing if I was facing a line of these at, less than 100
Your
metres.
experienced soldiers, of course, you'd always have your experienced soldiers at the front, and they're at 200 yards, and they're thinking, okay, they'll probably take a shot now. I've got a chance of being hit. 150 yards, okay, they're not fired yet, they're not doing anything. 100 yards, okay, this is the killing range now. Oh wait, they're waiting 70 yards, and of course they're starting to hang back now, because they're not so sure about this, and the chanting's not so strong, and the drums aren't beating quite as hard as they were, because they're thinking, oh, this is going to hurt.
It must have been absolutely terrifying.
Having witnessed the damage done by real musket balls at the Battle of Waterloo close up, it was hardly surprising that up to a third of men who made it to the operating table died. This was an era before germ theory or anaesthesia, where the wounded were thrown into ox carts for transportation, and field hospitals were filthy and overcrowded.
Even more shockingly, 8 times as many British soldiers died from disease during this period than from battle wounds, caused by pneumonia, typhoid, dysentery and malaria. The tiniest consolation, perhaps, as we prepared to face the French.
Number 2 section, deploy skirmishers! Sir! Number 2 section, quick, march! Section, halt! From the left, 4 paces, extend! Halt! 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 Rifles! Well, fire! And advance!
Lucky to escape the battlefield without a scratch, it was time to reflect on life in Wellington's army.
Oi, grasshopper, where have you been all day?
Listen here, you goddamn lobsterback. I've been risking my life behind enemy lines.
Listen, talk to me about enemy lines. We stand in front of enemy lines. We stand about 50 metres away, just take their musket balls. You talk to me about enemy lines. Anyway, how's your experience in the Green Jackets been? It looks like you finally earned one.
I have indeed, yes. Unfortunately, most of my experience was without the Green Jackets. You had to earn it. But now that I've got it, I feel very pristine. It's been a nerve-wracking but exhilarating day. So I've got the Green Jacket, and then I've got my trusty weapon, the Baker rifle. And I think this rifle might be one of my favourite rifles in the British Army. It's very lightweight. Okay, you sacrifice some reload speed with the patch ball, but it gives you that extra accuracy that you need, up to 300 yards. So you can take out those enemy generals. So overall, for clothing and equipment, I'm going to give it a good 7 out of 10. Okay. How about you?
I have to say, with the Coldstream Guards uniform, I've been very impressed today. Like, really nice, warm, comfortable jacket, woolen trousers, again keeping you warm, and then the Brown Bess musket. Sort of does the job it needs to do, right? I mean, you're not necessarily looking for picking out particular targets, but it reloads quickly. You know, some people could do it up to 4 rounds a minute. So, clothing and equipment, I'm also going to give the Guards a 7 out of 10.
And as you mentioned earlier, though, you'd have to face the enemy sometimes, 40, 50 yards away. In terms of safety, your odds of survival are not looking that great, are they? No,
my safety as a member of the Redcoats is pretty bad. I mean, if I don't die in the sort of line of fire facing off against the French, I could easily die from diseases. I mean, they're carrying sort of meat around that might have been cooked, a few days ago. Yeah. They generally are malnourished. Most of them are going to succumb to illness and disease as opposed to an enemy musket ball, but there's still a good chance of succumbing to an enemy musket ball. So yeah, safety 2 out of 10 for the Redcoats.
Well, of course, as a member of the Green Jackets, I'm still vulnerable to the same sort of diseases as the Redcoats were. But in terms of where we were on the battlefield, we'd generally be in woodland on the flanks, so our chances of survival on the battlefield are slightly higher, I'd say. But we also had to partake in pretty dangerous missions behind enemy lines, and I think if you got captured, your odds of surviving are not great, are they? So I would say safety-wise, I'll give it higher, but not too much higher, 4 out of 10, I'd say. And after a big battle, I mean, what did we really have to look forward to food-wise?
Yeah, the food's not great. I mean, I thought that the Redcoats were eating 2 times a day. Apparently it was a bit more flexible than that. They would potentially eat wherever they needed to on the march. If they had their wives with them in camp, it could be better. They could be, you know, they could be sort of getting home and eating freshly cooked meat and things like that. But for most soldiers, we're talking very, you know, very basic staples like bread and cheese and things like that. Their food is designed to keep them going as opposed to giving them much to look forward to.
Yes, and also lacking in vitamin and minerals. And also water. You know, beer is safer to drink than water. So I'd say, combined, what would you give food between us?
I think a 4 out of 10.
4 out of 10. I'd agree with you. And in terms of our chances of survival in general, I mean, it's the 1800s during the Napoleonic Wars. What were the sort of survival rates? Not great, were they?
I've read that in the Napoleonic Wars, 1 in 20 British soldiers were killed, infantrymen. So it's not great. 5% casualties is pretty poor if that statistic is correct. Medicine
isn't great in this period either.
No, exactly.
Chances of survival, I think maybe for the green jackets might be slightly better situation than the red coats, but I still think I'd give survival 5 out of 10 for the green jackets.
I think I'll have to go 5 out of 10 as well. There are more of us, so you know, safety in numbers at least, but you know, not a great prospect to be facing. Even though, as we said, life at home back in Britain might not be that great for the guys that are joining up. So
that's very true.
You know, I'm sure there were some positives to it, but could you survive? Who knows?
Who knows?
Welcome to the History Hit YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed that video.
And if you'd like to see more videos where we attempt to try and bring history to life, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell.
Cheers guys, see you soon.